Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Louis Brandmeier, co-founder of Clever Orbits, here with a strangely deepened voice. I'm going to let go of that. This is my co-host, Richard Futrell. Richard, how you doing?
Hello.
It almost feels like a sitcom that always opens with the same opening sequence.
That's right. It's a ritual.
Yeah, it makes everybody comfortable when they come on, which is great because your fiancé is about to be brutally murdered.
Yes, and the episode we're talking about today starts with a ritual.
It starts with a ritual. I was really initially nonplussed to see this episode, but once I got to it, I was like, yeah, that was curious. That was interesting. That was kind of fun.
Let's remind the listeners what we're listening to here.
The original series, first season episode, Balance of Terror, which, never quite gets explained. Maybe it's a reference to the neutral zone.
Yeah, it's a cool title.
Yeah, I thought it was a cool, but probably cool and badass, but simply also meaningless title.
Yeah.
Wait, you know what? I think I figured it out. The terror starts off on the Enterprise because they're like, we're going to die, right, with that plasma thing. And then the balance shifts, and the terror is with the Romulans, except for the Romulan commander, who's really noble and isn't actually ever afraid, from what I can tell.
Is he noble?
So, yeah. I think he might have been. I think there was something noble about his aspiration to peace, and his desire. Well, I mean, maybe he was just worn, like he was just tired of war. Maybe it wasn't a philosophical pacifist or a principled objection to war. More, maybe it was just like, I've seen so many people die, and one maybe imagines that the Romulans have been at war with other species and societies that they've conquered in this century, going in other directions than the one that the Federation is in. Maybe he was the head of those. I don't know. There's a backstory that we could fill in for him. But I liked it. To give an opening thought, I don't have a full salvo this time. I'm sure you do. But what would you think? Is it good?
This is good. It's one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah? How'd that determination come about?
It's always been one of my favorites. And I think, the thing that hooks you into the episode is the tense yet brooding atmosphere. And this episode's based off of this old submarine movie called The Enemy Below. Have you heard of this?
I saw some of the notes on it online.
Yeah. So the actual blow by blow, beat by beat is taken from this old submarine movie, and you can sort of see that in the fact that they talk about having to run quiet and how they need to dump junk. You can imagine all this stuff happening in a submarine scenario. Anyway, it creates this really cool, tense atmosphere. That's the thing that sucks you in, and the thing that keeps you in is there's this really interesting set of characters and dynamics and ideas centered around this contrast between the Romulan commander on one hand and Kirk, Captain Kirk, on the other hand. There's something about what is duty, what is leadership, what is power. How does Kirk lead? How does the Romulan lead? There's a lot of really rich stuff here.
Well, let's dive right in. What do you think the central theme was?
One of the things that keeps me coming back to this episode is I feel like it's a chestnut that I haven't quite cracked. I don't have a pat story for this thing. And that's good. The Romulan commander is not identifiably a metaphor or an allegory or a stand-in for an idea. He's a complicated guy. He believes in duty. He also believes in peace. He's torn about that. He decides to go take the ship to go look at this comet, basically because it's pretty. So he's got this sort of wistfulness about him. He appears to have a death wish, which I think is also why he went into that comet. So he's a very interesting character as a character and extremely well played. But what makes it deeper is that there's this contrast that the episode keeps on making between him and Kirk. You see them both on the bridge. You see how they command their crews. And basically, Kirk wins. How is it that Kirk leads that results in him winning? How is it that the Romulan leads that results in the Romulan losing? I think the difference is that Kirk leads by virtue of not his rank and not his political power, but by virtue of his own personal moral authority. So, think about how he reprimands Lieutenant Stiles for being a bigot towards Spock. It's a really great dramatic scene. He sort of gets in Stiles' face and says, "Leave your bigotry in your quarters, mister. It doesn't have any place on the bridge." And we'll get back to it. Let's leave a little pointer at that line to get back to it later because it's interesting. So right now, the important thing is just that Kirk is leading by moral authority, whereas the Romulan leader So the Romulan leader also faces a potentially insubordinate guy, this guy Decius, who's wearing a helmet. You can't even see his ears. They probably had him wear a helmet because they couldn't afford more prosthetic ears.
Yeah, that's exactly what.
Yeah. So Decius is being kind of uppity, and the Romulan commander says, "You're reduced 2 steps in rank. Go back to your post." And Decius actually does it. So, like, the Romulan commander actually, in some way, has better control over his underlings than Kirk does, because Kirk tells Styles to keep his bigotry in his quarters. Styles doesn't do it. Styles keeps on being a bigot. Whereas the Romulan guy tells Decius, "You're reduced 2 steps in rank," and Decius doesn't cause any more trouble. But I think what makes Kirk's leadership ultimately successful is that it's that part of it is that what he tells Styles is leave your bigotry in your quarters. He gives Styles space to be an individual and to make his own choices. But when you're on the bridge, you got to be professional. And when you think about this scene where McCoy comes into Kirk's quarters and says, there's a billion planets out there, but there's only one Jim Kirk. Don't let him be destroyed. That scene always struck me as weird before because it didn't really seem like Kirk was changing and needed to be set back on course. But I think what that scene is saying is that the source of Kirk's authority is his character as an individual. He's a moral authority and he's individual, and he lets other people be individuals. And because his leadership has that kind of flexibility that allows other people to maintain their distinctiveness, that allows him to win over this Romulan commander who's just a creature of duty and a creature of power.
So there's a level of, like, participation with compassion or with esprit de corps, which you get with Kirk, whereas it's just domination with the Romulan captain.
There's also this interesting contrast how the Romulan commander says, "We're creatures of duty. It's all we know. Just one more duty to perform," and then he dies. Similarly, when Spock saves Styles really wants to thank him, and Spock says, "That's just a duty. I was just saving a trained crewman. I'm capable of no further emotion." But it's different, because on the Enterprise, the duty is to save people. On the Romulan ship, the duty is to die. It's like this rigid control structure in this world where everyone is just going after political power just results in this death wish on the Romulan side, whereas this world of helping each other and preserving each other's personality and distinctiveness on the Enterprise side creates a much more open and powerful, work environment.
Yeah, well, it's a contrast between types of military, actually.
Yeah.
What makes for an effective military unit is one thing that's being asked here that I think is interesting, and this is one of those first episodes that showcase the Enterprise as a military, the Starfleet as a military organization. I think the particular brand of militarism that can show up in Starfleet is unique, especially compared to the Romulans. You underscore that well, and we hear in the Kelvin timeline movies, they're like, "I thought we were explorers. This is a military mission." So maybe in that universe, it's actually less militaristic initially, and maybe that's why they get so brutalized by the Narada, and why they're so rebounding into Section 31. But that's another conversation. There's the only point I really wanted to make is that there's a clear distinction in how militaristic and in what ways Kelvin versus the Prime Timeline. One of the questions I have is Romulans, right? It's clear that the author for the script was trying to make a reference to the Roman Empire and trying to make this really simple play on, relatively speaking, a simple play, like Romans in space, right? Yeah. And what makes it a little more interesting is to consider that perhaps the perspective of the universal translator, it interpreted the gestalt of the culture because I don't think they call themselves Romulan. That's the Federation, English, Starfleet name for it. And so I like to think, rather than that the Romulans are actually Romans in space, because that would be kind of a little absurd. That would be a little too close. That they were so close culturally to Romans that the universal translator just kind of its interpretive heuristic algorithm matrix or whatever came up with that title when they were first encountered. Yeah.
And that would be why they've got this guy named Decius. It is kind of funny how the Romulans are super Roman here, but then going forward in Next Generation, they're not identifiably Roman at all. And maybe that's because the universal translators got better as the result, as more data came in, and they had to stop relying on this hokey metaphor of the Romans.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is that the Romulans, their entire culture that you see through the 23rd and the 24th centuries are portrayed in essence here. There's like the power struggles, there's the will to conquer, there's the subterfuge, and these are elaborated on in great detail throughout Deep Space Nine and The Next Generation. And yet, there's a certain portrayal of them here, or at least this one Romulan, right, that brings nobility and I really do believe nobility.
Yeah, I was just trying to be provocative by asking if he's noble. But yeah, his bearing certainly has nobility.
And so there's a couple things to. What did you think of the space non-church, the churchy non-church space that they have the wedding in?
Yeah, the airport chapel.
Yeah.
I think it has something to do with the fact that they decided to focus around the ceremony has something to do with Kirk's leadership and this mystery of why he is the better leader. It has something to do with the fact that he's marrying his crew. It's hard to imagine the Romulan commander marrying two of his crew members in that way with tenderness. It did kind of seem like an airport chapel, though.
And then, the practice of wedding and marriage, it's been 300 years. Shouldn't it have changed? Wouldn't that be more interesting?
Maybe, one way to think about it is, okay, so there's this fact that in the original series we see a lot of cultural practices that seem conservative from the perspective of the year 2018. And maybe, history is not a monotonic change. Things don't always go in one direction and never go back in other directions. It could be that, more traditional gender roles are having a bit of a revival in the 2250s.
Maybe that's the explanation for the sexism.
They're all trad.
I did think Angela was really nice.
Yeah.
Until we found out that her husband's dead. The moment of compassion for this episode for me was like tears at the empathic or the sympathetic experience of because what I do in order to really understand these characters is I literally drop myself plop into their shoes and their experience. Like if somebody has lost someone that they love, I imagine all right, well, what would it be like if I were about to marry my girlfriend and then she died? And so I'm having a reaction not to the. Sometimes I do this. Other times the episode stands on its own enough to trigger really deep sensation. And I actually realized Star Trek is guerrilla empathy. If one is open to feeling the characters, because then you start feeling the feelings of the characters, and your empathic sense starts getting sharpened. That is, if you're willing to feel. But anyway, yeah, it's tough losing a husband, wife, fiance. On the Penske file, they make this comment well, I'm just really glad Kirk didn't try to flirt with her at the end. I felt like he was very paternal in that section of the episode. I felt like he was like the crew's daddy.
I think the idea that he would flirt with her is a sort of shallow reading of Kirk's character.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on with him than that. He's a lot more responsible and honorable and good-hearted.
He is like a father. He is sort of like a father figure to the crew rather than like a commander to the crew.
Yeah, which is, when you see the Romulan commander suffering when his person dies, but you don't see him as personally close to anybody other than that one guy, right?
Yeah, that old guy is just hanging around. What is that guy? He's called the Centurion. He's like some old guy, but he doesn't outrank the commander. Yeah, he's just his friend. Just brought it along on the trip.
Yeah, which is strange. Yeah, it is strange that he's kind of like hanging around.
You don't see him doing any work.
He's kind of advising the captain, it feels like.
They really all the work they do on that ship is they look in their little screens. They bend down and look in their little visor things.
Their little view screens.
Their periscopes. That's really what's going on.
So, for some reason, this watch through got me present to the fact that the theme song reminds me very much of a party.
Yeah.
Do 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 do. Something you might dance to. There was this guy in a white spacesuit-looking thing walking through the halls very early on in the episode. I noticed that. So apparently they have work uniforms on the ship. I like the railings on the bridge. This was just something that I noticed. I just thought it was a cool feature. The Outpost uniform, that guy had a different insignia. It was unclear what insignia it was. It was more like a smudge, but it was an insignia. And then, the first time I saw the episode recently, when Spock says the Romulan War was fought with primitive atomic weapons, no ship-to-ship communication, no captive, no quarter, I was like, but wait, hasn't he seen Enterprise? I mean, like, of course he hadn't, but he prefaces that sentence by stating that by our standards, so the beginning of his sentence is a comparative one. Like, all right, so back then things were not the way they are now, and they're much smaller and all this other stuff. And that actually, now, the comment about primitive atomic weapons is a little too specific, but if we were going to say, hey, are ICBMs compared to, the rockets from World War II or the rockets from the 19th century even, that comparison might be legitimate. So that was my way of making sense of that. And then invisibility, right? Invisibility is possible. It's theoretical. Yeah. So I think there's a subtlety here that could get missed, which is the distinction between a cloaking device and an invisibility screen, right? An invisibility screen just makes the ship invisible, which apparently they can still follow it on sensors, even though they can't see it with the naked eye. Mm-hmm. So, a cloaking device, as we get with the later Romulans in the Enterprise incident, which we should probably watch next week. Yeah, that would be fun. I really want to watch that now. I really want to learn more about TOS-era Romulans. Those uniforms are pretty cool.
They are.
Their overall bearing is interesting. But they have a much more effective cloaking device that makes them completely invisible to sensors that they apparently so it's weird because in Enterprise they do have full-on cloaking technology. They do use it. They have a minefield. Enterprise gets trapped in it. And then here they're back to just having an invisibility screen, kind of a sidestep or something. But maybe sensors have evolved and advanced, and the invisibility screen is just the light head above the curve in the Cold War of weapons development. And then, I thought it was also interesting that the Romulan captain looks so much like Sarek, which is explainable by virtue of the fact that, if they are an offshoot, then probably they have the same genetic material on some level. And, maybe there would be people who look pretty much the same, for all we know, right?
It's possible.
It's enough of a stretch. So I definitely agreed with you that the Romulan commander is interesting, bemoaning his own culture, and that their bridge looks kind of like a submarine. What did you think of that part when the heavy ceiling piece falls after the Romulan, and it bounces off of the Romulan commander and then hits the other guy and kills him?
Yeah, that's a classic.
That is a gaffe and a goof and a funny moment. You know what? I think that's the only one I'm ever going to try not to explain. It's just like, I'll just appreciate it for what it is and for what it is not. And then so what did you think about this? In the episode, the possibility is actually left open for the viewer that Spock is actually a Romulan spy, especially given his slip-up where he presses that button on the bridge, letting the Romulans know where they are. And also, I thought the fact that the phaser coolant leaks right after he goes into the phaser control room. Like if I were watching, and didn't know Spock, those would all be very, combined with his ears, telling suggestions. And I like in the face of that, Kirk's unwavering faith and trust. And again, we'll return to that line, leave your bigotry at the door. Like, he's just got this assumption based on the look of Spock, this guy Styles. But what did you think about that? Did you experience that maybe he could have been a spy?
I kind of like that idea. And if you think about it, this whole deal where he puts Styles in danger and then saves him would be an excellent move to make if he were a spy, because it neutralizes Styles as his biggest detractor, right? So Styles was the one who was going to unmask him, and now Styles is going to, owe his life to him.
Yeah, he completely converted by the end.
Yeah. That's
styles.
exactly the kind of plan a Romulan would come up with, man.
So, I mean, maybe, I don't know, in that story, given the rest of his career, and given the way that he relates to the Romulans later on, like he's fighting for reunification, right? In The Next Generation, and then in the 2009 movie, and is trying to save Romulus. Isn't able to, sadly, but he's really committed to Vulcan and Romulus, and it seems like he actually doesn't know what they look like. So, I mean, I think ultimately the story that he isn't a spy and that he does just find out, oh, yeah, I guess they're an offshoot or something. Like, I think there's stories in Vulcan culture of a group of us that left, so to speak, to do their own thing. And maybe he was thinking about that when he came up with they're probably an offshoot comment. Yeah, I don't know what story to tell if he was a spy. Like, basically, he went into Starfleet, and he's kind of a sleeper agent, and they only activate him once for one mission, and then for the rest of his career he's not made use of. Or maybe he had this whole secret spycraft aspect of his life that's just left out of most of Star Trek. I don't know. And that's maybe somebody, if they do that in Discovery, I'm going to be real pissed. Like season 2 of Discovery, Spock is actually a Romulan spy, and Burnham must confront us and deal with it, and then Burnham dies.
I don't think he is. I think it's not going to be possible to maintain the idea that he really is a Romulan spy. But look, maybe he does feel some kind of kinship towards the Romulans that is acting on a level that he's not aware of. I mean, he sees the Romulan guy who looks just like his father, right? Maybe that gives maybe, we've seen the characters in this episode have hidden motivations, like the Romulan commander clearly wants to die, right? So we've established that hidden motivations are a thing. And so, yeah, maybe Spock is acting out of a sort of unconscious fascination with the Romulans. Maybe he wants to provoke more contact with them so that he can learn more about them.
He clearly has an affection for them throughout the rest of his life. I mean, even in the next episode we'll see, this is the Enterprise incident, he expresses real feelings for a Romulan commander, a female Romulan commander. And so there's something real there, but I actually prefer to read Spock as honorable. Like, of course, it's not an actual spy, but, it's a possibility.
It's interesting that it works so well for this episode.
Yeah, it is.
It doesn't really work so great outside the episode. It is a
Anywhere
weird
else,
little team, yeah.
And then, let's see. So in, I think it was City on the Edge of Forever, we got Scotty doing Sulu's job, and here we get Uhura doing what will later be Chekhov's job. I thought that was interesting.
Apparently, everyone on the bridge can do all the jobs.
Yeah, they're all cross-trained. The remastered effects were really beautiful. There's a really great video on YouTube. I think it's by E.C. Henry, talking about how, like, the 23rd century view screen technology is actually really advanced because it's a holographic representation that is made up of data that is manipulable, that is explorable and turnable, which explains why there are camera angles that change inside the Romulan ship.
Yeah, it kind of zooms in. And also, look, so the Romulans, when they're in their ship, whenever they're looking out, they're looking into their periscope things, right? But then when the Romulan commander is addressing the Enterprise, is he just talking into a bulkhead or something?
Is he
just standing looking at a wall and saying, in another reality, we may have been friends?
No, it had to have been a camera. It had to have been some sort of communications terminal that was, like, meaningful, I like to think.
Seems like it might have been a security camera. There's a lot of paranoia. They don't really trust each other on that bridge. It's another big difference between the Enterprise and the Romulans.
Yeah, maybe the helmets are because they're afraid of each other, too.
I think the helmets sort of show their destruction of their individuality. But yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or they're always war garb around each other. They're not like a family. They don't have a father figure. They've just got duty, and they've got people trying to climb the political ladder just like in Rome.
Thankfully, that society did not take the prominence here that it appears to have done there. So I felt like the woman, Angela, was probably Christian or something like that, given her kneeling. Like, why would you kneel in a chapel unless you were kneeling to some kind of deity or something?
It's clearly theistic.
Yeah, and then
I think it's part of the the throwback culture that's really popular in the 2250s.
It's retro. Yeah, that's actually a really robust explanation for all the stuff that is purely.
They're going through a 1960s fad in the 2250s.
Hence all the bright colors. Let's see. So let's return to one of the two. Okay, before we return to the central focus of the episode, that line you bookmarked, what did you think about not Sarek's grimace fall during the self-destruct?
It was. I liked it. You got to sort of calibrate your perception of the acting in this show to the 1960s.
Like it looked like a scene from Batman or something. I mean, there's a sudden flash, and then he's at an angle falling, like he tripped over something. So anyway, that was funny. But the quote that we returned to is, "Leave any bigotry in your quarters. There's no room for it on the bridge." I think that's the central. Yeah,
that's Kirk's smackdown. It sort of sounds, continuing on this idea of Kirk as a father figure. It's kind of like he's saying, "Go to your room." It's a sort of fatherly smackdown against a child.
Yeah, and it's also, interestingly enough, pointing to the fact that in the 22nd and the 23rd century, humanity is still in development on some level. Like, there are still some humans who have these opinions that are not useful, and Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets represent these ideals. And people join them because they agree with them, but maybe some people in Starfleet or some people in the Federation don't necessarily resonate. They just accept the existence of a governing body or a governmental group that keeps the peace and keeps them fed and all of this other stuff. Like maybe it's begrudging, and I get the sense that might be what's going on with Styles. He begrudgingly accepts, because his father died in the Romulan War, which before the Federation was founded, right before the Federation was founded. And actually part of the reason why, if you take Christopher Bennett's novels on the rise of the Federation to be the thing, which I've never been able to get through those. I tried, but I was a little lost because I came in too late. His other stuff's all great, but yeah, it's something that maybe there's still resentment on Earth, just like Holocaust survivor might be upset at the Germans it might blame the Germans in general for a war 100 years ago, or 50, 60 years ago, I guess now, 80 years ago, excuse me. So yeah, what do you think about that? Any more on that line?
Yeah, it's another line in that interaction which sort of sticks with me is when Styles is talking about how his father died fighting the Romulans, and Kirk says, "Their wars, their war, not yours." Mm-hmm. There's this strong separation, and there's this idea of separation also in this thing where he says, "Leave your bigotry in your quarters." It's like you kind of got to be two people. You can be yourself in your quarters, whether that's good or bad. I don't know. You can be an individual. You can maintain your individual distinctiveness in your quarters. Maybe in your quarters you worship the ghost of your father, and you hate the Romulans, and you get a lot of meaning out of that. But when you're on the bridge, you're in a different role. You have to be a professional. You are Lieutenant Styles on the bridge. So your rank sort of, or your position in this professional family creates this insulation that between your personal life and your professional life that allows the bridge to work. And that's part of this idea of how Kirk's leadership being more flexible makes it more successful, because he gives people this separation, this wall of separation. Whereas on the Romulan ship, they keep on worrying about this guy Decius because he has powerful friends. His personal connections are just totally linked up with his professional life on the ship, and there's just no getting around it, and it results in constant paranoia. So that's one angle on this line. I really, I feel like this episode is this incredibly rich tapestry of like point-by-point comparisons and lessons about leadership and stuff, and there's no simple sort of narrative that comes out of it for me. It's just like this infinitely complex thing to look at. I also like the part where Spock takes out that big piece of metal and says, "Cast ruthenium, the hardest material known to our science." And then it's just very clearly styrofoam or something, man. He just snaps it.
Spock was a bit dramatic in this episode.
He was.
In general. Like we need to kill them. If they're anything like my ancestors, I know that we need to fight them now. Or I'm going to break this piece of metal really powerfully in front of everybody to prove a point. I guess that was the same conversation, actually.
That reminded me of the Vulcan hello from Discovery.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, now that I think about that in retrospect, it makes total sense.
And I remember when the Vulcan Hello came out, so as a reminder to our listeners, in the Vulcan Hello, there's this idea that the correct Vulcan way to greet the aggressive Klingons would be to attack them. And I remember there's a lot of people on forums and stuff online who are like, no, the Vulcans always favor peace. It would never be rational to attack. Well, here you go, man. Spock is saying we need to attack the Romulans at all costs.
Yeah, it was right there in the original series.
Yeah.
So I'd say overall 9.5 on my side. I mean, I liked it, but I don't know. The experience of the layers was never there until you told me, and I might watch it again and enjoy this beforehand, just to remind me of those and to be on the lookout for stuff. For now, I'm glad I'm done with it.
Yeah, you give it a 9.8, and the points away from 10 are because there are some parts where the pacing is a bit awkward, but whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even have a problem with that. I liked the pacing, and I liked the dread and the atmosphere of the episode. It was all very well done. And I didn't even mind that it was eventually so much a ripoff of submarine stuff that they forgot that noises can't travel in the vacuum of space. I mean,
that's dramatic.
Make sure we're running silence.
Got to turn off those lights.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get it. But yeah. So all right. Well, that was the balance of terror, ladies and gentlemen. As if they were.
See you on the other side.
See you on somewhere.